Okay, we're starting a new perek now, a new subject. I didn't look it up, but the way we did it is that in perek Shvi, the Mishnah spoke about all lamates malachis, and then the Gemara in short spoke about most of them, and then the Mishnah started speaking in length again about carrying, about removing from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, many details. And then now it's going back to a few random details within the Lamates Malachis to explain them, to explain the details. Now the simple reason would be most probably because most of the details, the most complicated one is removing, carrying, and therefore the Mishnah first discusses all those, and then it moves on to all the other Malachis, building and tying knots and writing. All those things are much more compressed, much more concentrated, much more limited, and therefore it goes next. That might be the simple understanding. It says that Tesis Yontif gives another explanation. I did not look it up, but that's what we're going to focus on now. Now, there's going to be lots of confusions between two very similar malachis. One of them is called boine, building, and one of them is called makeh bepatish, the hammer blow. Boine is building, and makeh bepatish means finishing up a keli, finishing up any utensil, making the final touch to make it useful. Now, they're very, very similar. Building means building something useful, and a final touch in a keli also makes it useful. But so where do these two things go? So in general, there's a rule that was mentioned earlier in the Gemara that building and destroying applies to things that are attached to the ground. Things that are detached, it's not called building, it's not called destroying. That's the rule we mentioned earlier. And therefore, simply speaking, when we speak about making a keli, making anything detached, we will call it makeh bepatish. You're preparing something to be used that's similar to a final hammer blow in whatever utensil you're using, and that's the malacha of it. And therefore, destroying, breaking it would not be a malacha unless you're making something useful from that. However, we'll see soon that Tosfos brings down to explain one of the opinions in our Gemara that it depends which type of utensil we're talking about. If it's a very firm, strong utensil, or it's a flimsy one. A firm utensil, says Tosfos, does have building, at least according to Rav, one of the opinions in the Gemara. And a flimsy one, that's where we say that there's no building and no destroying. And therefore, according to that, when do we say that it's only makeh bepatish, only the final hammer blow, only the fact that you're preparing the thing to be useful, not the fact that you're building, and that there wouldn't be an issue of destroying? That's talking about a very weak, a very flimsy utensil. But any firm, strong utensil, there's also an issue of building, according to Rav, according to some opinions. So that will be, this mission will basically put these two malachas together, building and makeh bepatish, the final hammer blow, and basically we'll try to sort the different activities, what belongs to what. When you build something, what's the size? We spoke about sizes the whole time, about removing from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. On Shabbos, everything has to be significant. What's the size of building something significant? Says the Mishnah, Habayna Kolshu, the smallest amount. Now that is puzzling because removing something from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, it makes sense that you can have many objects that are very useful even when they're very small. But building seemingly would have to be something substantial. If it's just a small building, what use does it have? Good. The Gemara will explain. V'hamisates, one who like carves out a rock and straightens it out with a hammer, he like bangs it out into shape. That's also something you're not allowed to do, and it doesn't say why. We'll see soon. The Gemara will have a discussion why. Ve'amakeh bepatish. So the way Tosfos explains, that's a typical explanation we know. It's the final hammer blow on any utensil that puts it into shape, makes it useful. That's considered the malacha. But it doesn't have to be a hammer. It could be any other utensil that you use. Ubematzod. It's like a larger hammer that you use for metal utensil. According to Rashi, Makeh B'Patish is talking about knocking out a rock from the mountain, the final blow that you knock it out. And then the matzah, there's a different type of a hammer you use for metal utensils. And again, you make the final hammer blow. Tosfos doesn't like the pshat. He says that we're all talking about a final blow that makes a utensil useful. So what is patish or matzah? Which utensils is it used for? I'm not sure. But it's different type of hammers which are used for different types of utensils. Doesn't matter which. The point is the outcome. You made a utensil useful. Or hakoideyach kol shuhu, one who makes a hole in the wall, the smallest amount, chayev is also chayev. Any of these malachis, whether it falls into the category of boina, whether it falls into the category of makeh b'patish, there's no size. As long as it's useful, it's a malacha. We'll see soon what's a hole in the wall. What is that useful for? Okay. Usually you want to fill in the holes in the wall. You don't want to have holes in your wall. Good. We'll speak about it. And the Gemara gives a rule. Zaklal, this is the rule. Kol ha'oisa malacha, whoever does a malacha, umalachta miskayemes, and whatever he did lasts, which means it's a type of act that you can just leave it, just the way it is. You did it. It's done. I did the final job. Chayiv. In other words, this is the idea of either makeh b'patish, a final touch, no matter what you did. What you did is the final touch that makes it useful, then it's a malacha. The same thing by boina. In some cases, I could do a small touch on a building, and that small touch did something that it's a full thing. I could just leave it that way. And if that's the case, I'm chayiv, no matter what's the size. That doesn't make a difference, the size, the measurement. The point is that I did something useful. Shimon Gamliel Omer, a bigger chiddush. When they would use a hammer to shape a utensil, in the middle they would have this big metal base. Some could fill me in with the right word for it. And they would like bang on that, I guess, to smoothen out the hammer in order to make it do a better job. So it's not really the final touch for the utensil, but it's part of the process.
Called an anvil.
Anvil.
Yep.
Okay. So you bang the hammer on the anvil, and then you bang it on the utensil, and then it does a good job. So I didn't do the final touch for the utensil, but I made it like a final touch for the hammer. The hammer now is useful to continue forming the utensil. Says Reb Shimon Gamliel, that's also chayiv. Because it's as if you're fixing the utensil, because you're fixing the hammer in order to be able to fix the utensil. So Chacham won't agree with that. They say, no, you're not fixing the utensil. But Reb Shimon Gamliel says, no, that's part of the process, and therefore that's also considered a malacha. Short. Reb David, short.
If you don't improve the hammer, it's part of the process of hammering metal. When it's hot, it's banging on this anvil and then banging on the metal.
Correct.
So it's one of the process.
Correct.
Even if you don't have the thing, you still bang on the
Correct.
thing.
But Chachamim hold it's not the final touch. Correct. But still, since you're not fixing the final product you're looking for, so Chachamim say that's not called makeh b'patish. Reb Shimon Gamliel says it. Okay. So the Gemara is trying to understand why is the smallest size of building already considered building. A final hammer blow I could understand. I can have the final touch which makes something useful. But when I'm building something, a very small amount, what could you build that will be useful? The the smallest amount of building, what could it be useful for? If I carry an object, a small object could be useful. But if I build something, a small building, what is that useful for? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, shekein ani chofer guma. A poor man has a small hut and obviously an earth floor, and he goes working and he gets a few pennies, but those pennies are very precious for him. He doesn't have a safe, doesn't have a place to keep all his precious pennies. So what does he do? He digs a hole in the ground, and he keeps his pennies over there. Okay, fine, very nice. But I have to find something similar in the Mishkan, because all malachas have to originate in the Mishkan. And since this is just a poor man's way of keeping things, it's not necessarily something I would say is considered useful unless I find something similar in the Mishkan. Let's look in the Mishkan. It says the Gemara, the Kavase Gavi Mishkan. Let's look in the Mishkan. Where do we find it in the Mishkan? Shekein Toifre Yiriyos. Those that would sew the carpets that they would cover the Mishkan with. Also, Choifrin Guma, they were in the desert, so they would dig a hole, that's Niaba Machteyan. And they would keep their needles over there. Abaye Omer says, no. They would never do such a thing. Kevan de Nishtaki. If they would put the needles in the ground, it would become rusty. They wouldn't do that. Lo Yavdi Hachi. They would not do that. Let me look for another example. Shekein Ani Oisepit Pute Kiroktano. A poor man has a small pot, and he wants to cook his, his bits of grain that he was able to collect in the field. And he doesn't need a big pot for that, and he can't afford a big pot. And he can't afford a stove, a proper place to make a proper fire. So what does he do? He makes a few bumps in the ground to be able to lift his pot, and he puts some wood on the bottom and he lights a fire. And it's a small thing. All you need is a few bits on the ground just to raise it a bit higher. That's all you need. So it's a very small building. He just puts a small pot on that and a bit of straw on the bottom and he lights the fire. And that's good enough. Okay, let's look for that in the Mishkan. Where do they do that? The Kavasagavi Mishkan, let's look in the Mishkan. Now, if they would try to dye the ram skin in such a small pot, it wouldn't really work. Yeah, they have to have a big pot for that. So where do they have these, where do they make such a small fire? So he says, those that would cook the dye, in order to dye the rugs, the carpets, they needed a bit more, a few more threads. Just, they missed out a bit of tcheles and a bit of argomon. You want to just, they're missing just a bit. So what do? They make these small bumps in the ground, to put on top of it a small pot, and they would cook a bit of dye and put a bit of wool inside, and that was good enough. That's Abaye's suggestion. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong will happen to this dye or to the wool that you're dyeing with it. Fine, but no. They wouldn't do such a thing in the Mishkan. In the Beis Hamikdash and in the Mishkan, you never act like a poor man. First of all, they wouldn't make just the right amount of wool. They would make a lot more. And they would always do a large pot, a respectful fireplace, a respectful stove. And they don't make small bits on the ground and put a small fire and put a small pot because they're missing a bit of thread. They don't do that. They act like rich people. They don't act like poor people. And never did not exist in the Mishkan. Okay? So where do we find this small building in the Mishkan? Says the Gemara, Shekin Balabais. Anybody who has a house. Even a rich man who has a hole in his wall, what does he do? He puts a bit of plaster and he fills that hole. He doesn't build a whole new building because he has a hole in his wall. He just fills in that hole. So that a small amount of plaster will be good enough. Okay. The Kivasi Gavi Mishkan, they also had that. Shekein Keresh, if one of the beams for the Mishkan, Shenafla Beidarno, that a worm had made a hole in it, Mativ Latoicha Avor, they would drip into it some lead. So I guess it looks similar to the beam. It doesn't. It's not such an odd filling. This nice man, they would fill it. Fine, that's the end of it. So if they needed to have any fillers, they would do that in the Mishkan as well. And that's considered building something useful with the smallest amount, the smallest size. And that's why any small size of fixing is already considered building. Fine. Okay. We're speaking about building. If in Eretz Yisrael they would build houses out of rock, and the first layer were just rocks on the ground, stones on the ground. Were you fixing? Which was the correct word? Yeah, they would they put a stone on the ground. Huh?
Foundation.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a foundation in the ground.
No, you don't have to. You can have it a very heavy stone.
Correct. So they have heavy stones on the ground. What you need to do is you have to position it. You have to position it in the right way. You have to put the earth on the side in the right way so it should be standing straight, and therefore it can hold the whole building. If it's a bit tipsy, then the whole building will be tipsy. So you don't have to cement it. You don't have to do anything but position it. One who positions the lowest row, the foundation of a building, he positions that stone, that rock. Chayiv, that's considered building, just positioning. You didn't connect it to anything, that's already considered building. Meisaveh, I have a Braisa which contradicts Shmuel. The Braisa says that positioning is nothing, you gotta cement it. It says, what if two people do a malacha? You always look for the one who did the right thing, the useful act, and only he is chayiv. If two people were building, one of them put a rock, the other person put the lane, put the what do you call it? The cement. That's what we use today. So one of them put cement. The one who put the cement, only he is chayiv. The one who put the rock is useless. So you're telling me positioning is already everything. No, that's not true. You must cement it. If you didn't put cement in it, it's worthless. It's going to fall in. Says the Gemara, one second. For the Tamech, Amos Seif. You're saying, 1 second. You're telling me that without cement, it's nothing. Amos Seif, look in the Sefer. Now, according to the Gra, you don't say Rabbi Yosi Omer, which that will make it flow much better. The Sefer says, "Vafilu hela v'niach." Even if you just took up the stone and you put it al gabe dimu shel avonim, on top of a row of rocks or a row of stones, chayiv, you're already chayiv. So I'm totally confused. Shmuel says you have to position it. The beginning of the Braisa says without cement it's nothing. The end of the Braisa says just putting it on top of the other stones, on top of the rows, it's already done. Positioning, putting cement, just placing it over there. What's the malacha? Depends where. There are 3 parts of a building. Tato, mitzio, ilah. The foundation, the middle, and the top. Tato, the foundation, boy tzedudi. You must position it. The afro, you have to put on the side the earth in order to keep it in the right place. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Mitzio, the middle rows, boinami tina. You must put the cement. Otherwise, it's not going to hold the things on top of it. Ilah, the top row, already has cement. You already put cement on the bottom rock. So therefore, you just put it down over there and that's it. You don't need to position it. You don't need to cement it. The cement is there. The position is already set from the rows below. You just put the rock on top, done. So it depends where in the building you put the stone. If you put it on the bottom row, you got to position it. If you put it in the middle row, you got to put the cement. If you put it on the top row, just put it there. So wherever you put a stone and it's useful, you did the malach. So there's no steers whatsoever. Fine. Okay. I'm sorry, the Tosfos says that we're not good as Rabbi Yossi. Yeah? And that's the everyone says we don't say Rabbi Yossi. The Sefer just says a contradicting statement to the beginning of the Brisa. The Brisa in the beginning says you gotta put the cement, and then the end of the Brisa says you could just put the rock over there. You're contradicting yourself. Depends where. Fine. Okay. Next. Now the Mishnah said something very strange. It said building, which is one of the Av Malachis, then the smallest amount you're chayiv. It later said Makeh Patish, banging with them, which is one of the Av Malachis, and also finished off that you're chayiv with the smallest amount. And in the middle it sticks Misates, carving out a rock. Now, where does that belong to? It's not one of the Av Malachis. So it's either Boina or Makeh Patish. It can't be anything else. Which one does it fit into? You put it sandwich in the middle. You left me confused. I don't know what it belongs to. Says the Gemara, Misates Mishumai Mechayiv. Carving out a rock, why are you chayiv? Rav Omar Mishum Boina. Rav says it's considered building. Ushmuel Omar Mishum Makeh Patish. Shmuel says, no, that's not considered building. You didn't do the building yet. You didn't build it into anything. All you did is Mishum Makeh Patish. You finished preparing the stone to be used for a building. So you didn't build anything. You did a final preparation for something. It's Makeh Patish. Fine? One who makes a hole in a chicken coop in order to let out the stuffy air and to bring in some fresh air. So Rav Amar Mishum Baina, you're building. Ushmuel Amar Mishum Makeh Patish. And Shmuel says you made a final preparation. So it seems like we're talking over here about a chicken coop which is attached to the ground. And therefore anything that you fix in something attached to the ground should be considered building. And making this opening, which brings in air and lets out air, according to Rav, it's similar to making a door. A door, you walk in, you walk out. So whenever you make anything similar to that, it's considered building. Shmuel said, it's not building. You're not walking into that hole, walking out of that hole. It's the ear going in and out. That's not called bringing in, bringing out. You're making it useful. You're making it useful. That's considered Makeh Patish. And Rav says, no, you're making a doorway. They could enter, the good air, fresh air enters, the bad air leaves, and therefore it's considered building. Okay? The next example, Ayil Shuvsa Bekupino de Mora. When you put a handle of a shovel, so there's the wooden handle, and then there's the metal shovel. You put it in, and then you take like a peg to keep it firm together. So then, Rav Amar Mishum Boina, it's building. Why building? We said that there's no such a thing as building in utensils, only if it's attached to the ground. So this is where Tosfos explains that, and that's the opinion we mainly accept lahalacha, that in anything firm and strong, there is building even in utensils, according to Rav. And we pass like Rav. The halacha is usually like Rav bi Yisurei, and therefore you're not allowed to break anything strong. That's where the discussion about opening cans on Shabbos comes in. That many places can say it's a problem because you're breaking something strong, even if you're throwing it out right away, but it's something firm. Others say it's not called firm because it's disposable. It's meant to be thrown away right away. Therefore, it's not called firm, which is a question of where is there a proof or such a logic that something which you intend to throw away is considered not firm, although practically it's considered firm. It could last for ages if you don't open it. Fine. Okay. That's another discussion. So Rav Omar Mishum Boina, because it's a firm utensil. Shmuel Omar Mishum Makeh Patish. Shmuel says that it's considered Makeh Patish because he holds that there's no such a thing at all of building in utensils, and therefore it's considered just preparing a utensil to be used. Now, these are three machloikas with the same logic, seemingly, that Shmuel says anything that you just fix, you didn't literally build, is considered just Makeh Patish. And Rav says seemingly not. Anything which you fix can also be considered boina, as long as it's firm, or it's attached to the ground, or it's making a rock, ready for building. It's all called building. So he's much more quick to put things into the category of building. So what's the difference between one case and the other? Says the Gemara, it's all, each one I would not know from the other. Now the mind of Kamina, which Malach is Nafkamina for mainly for Hasra, when you have to warn someone that he's doing a malacha in order to be, he should be chayiv skila, then you have to tell him the right malacha. If you tell him the wrong malacha, then he's potter. So you have to know what malacha belongs to. The also nafkamina will be, not for all cases, but for this last idea of firm kalim, the nafkamina will be breaking. Makav patish is only building. Breaking is only if there's boina, then there's soiser as well. So the question is there an issue in at least in the shovel, let's say taking it apart, is it an issue of breaking, of soiser? Okay. Says the Gemara, each case I would not know from the other. I need all three cases. The Yashminan Kamaisa, if you just tell me the first case of carving out this rock, I would say only then Rav says it's called boina. It's part of the process of building. However, when you make a hole in a chicken coop, it's not part of building. You don't build, it's just a hole. That's it. You just leave it that way. I would say he agrees to Shmuel. If you would talk about a chicken coop, I would say, okay, a chicken coop, okay. It's similar to a building because just like in a building, you make holes, which is a window. So you're also for the chickens, it's good enough to have a small hole. That's their window. So it's like similar. It's not part of the process of building, but it's similar to a building, right? But so I would say the Avdi Lavira because you're making ear come in. I will show some kopino demora to put the handle into the shovel and with the peg inside. It's not similar to any building. It's the way you make a shovel, not a building. I would say that it's called Makav Patish. So that's why Rav needs to speak about the three cases. Okay. Now, seemingly, Rav could have just said the last case. Just speak about a shovel, and I would know the rest. But then there'll be a problem with Shmuel. 1 second. If we would just talk about a shovel, I would say Shmuel. Only here Shmuel says that it's not considered building because it's not similar to building. By a hole in a chicken coop and definitely in carving out a rock, I would say that Shmuel agrees that it's considered building, and therefore it's tzricha. Therefore you need to have all three cases. Now, seemingly, you could just have the first and the last case. You can have carving out the rock, which is the most similar to building. You can have making the shovel, which is the least similar to building. And l'chayri, you would know everything. So State says, no. The Gemara just mentioned a few logics, but there's other logics as well. And therefore, we wouldn't know any of them from the other. Fine? Okay. Why? Because the hole in the chicken coop is like a final, complete building in a miniature way, similar to making a hole in your building and making a window. However, carving out a rock is only a preparation for building. Maybe. There's another svart over here. There's more svartas, which is interesting also. La halacha, the poskim seem to take different opinions in these three machloikis, and are not necessarily in the order of the Gemara. If I'm not mistaken, the Rambam says that carving out a rock is makav patish, but the hole and the shovel is boina. In halacha, I think that the hole is considered makav patish, but the shovel is considered boina. So I'm not really sure. I was trying to figure out. I didn't come to clarity how exactly it works, but it seems like there's more ways to differentiate between these three cases that the Gemara did not mention. Therefore, we need all three machlokes. Fine. Far away in Eretz Yisrael, there was a murder which asked Rabbi Yechanan, why is misatis chayiv? Ach v'lei biyadei. He motioned with his hand. Mishum ma'akev patish. He showed a hammer. She said, why? Look in the Mishnah. It says one who carves out a rock and the final hammer blow. It sounds like a different malacha. Amy says, no, read it a bit better, the Mishnah. One who carves out a rock, which is banging with a hammer. In other words, it's the same malacha. It's a detail in that same malach. Fine. Okay, let's finish off because it's the end of the subject. Toshma, hakideyach kolshu. It says in our Mishnah, if you make a hole, chayiv. Now, why is the smallest hole chayiv? Simply, you would make a hole in order to put in a peg, to hang something on it. So it's not a final hammer blow. If it's not a final hammer blow, it's not makav patish. So why would he be chayiv? It must be because you're building. By the chicken coop, that's the final thing. But a regular hole in a wall, it's not the final thing. And we see that you're chayiv. It must be because you're building. Bishlam al-Rav, mechazeh, looks like command the chur binyana. It's, I don't know why I'm saying mechazeh. 1 second. It's similar to building because when you build, you also sometimes make holes in the building. So you're making a hole in the building. You're making a hole in order to build something. And then the Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, if you make a hole in the wall, you're not leaving the hole in the wall. You want to fill it up with something. So how could it be makav patish? Says the Gemara, no. He's talking about a hole with a nail. The shafke begavein, you're leaving the nail in the wall, you're making a hook. And instead of making a hole and then putting a peg, you take a long nail, you bang it in the wall, and you leave it there. So you're making a hole when it's useful, right? By making the hole. That's the final touch. The Hainu Gemar Malach, it's the final touch. That's what we mean, piercing a hole in the wall with the nail, with the hook, and you leave the hook over there. And therefore it's considered chayiv, but if it would be a hole to put a hook later, Shmuel would say he's potter. That's enough given Allah halach. It's a not Isa de Raisa, according to Shmuel, because he knows building is only building. Any other fixing is makav patish. And Rav says, no, any fixing and anything connected to building is considered building. So Rav says anything connected to building, such as carving out the rock, or anything similar to building, like a hole in a chicken coop, or any fixing a firm utensil, such as putting in firmly the handle and the shovel, is considered building. And Shmuel says, no, if it's the final touch, it's considered makav patish. Okay, so what do we see in this Gemara? Let's summarize. We spoke about that the size for building or for makav patish is the smallest amount that's useful. We said that according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, makav patish is not only a final hammer blow on the utensil, but also on the forgot the word.
Anvil.
Also, when you bang on the anvil in order to fix the hammer, in order to continue working properly, it's also considered a final hammer blow. We had a question. Why is the smallest amount considered building when it's not? What is it useful for? A poor man storing his coins, but when they do it in the Mishkan, they wouldn't store their needles there. It would rust. What do you call it? A poor man makes the small things to hold his pot, and in the Mishkan they would make a small pot to do the leftover dyeing. They would not do that in the Mishkan, says Rav Acher Bayankiv. They act like rich people, but they would fill in a hole with some lead, like a rich man also. Then he fills a hole in his wall. Fine. Then Shmuel said that if you just position the rock in the beginning of the building, you're already building. In the Braisa, it says you have to put the cement. And at the end of the Braisa, it says you just put the rock. What's going on over here? Depends which row. The foundation, you have to position. The middle, you have to put the cement. The top, you just put it there, and it's already lying on the cement. Fine. Then we had a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. about three things if it's considered building or makeh b'patish. Rav is much quicker to consider things building. Preparation for building, shaping the rock for the building, that's considered building according to Rav. Shmuel says that's makeh b'patish. You did the final preparation of the rock for building. And putting a handle in the shovel, I'm sorry, before that, making a hole in a chicken coop. Rav says it's similar to building. It's like a hole in the wall, it's like a window. And Shmuel said, no, it's not building, it's making something useful to makeh b'patish. Then putting a handle into a shovel. So Rav says it's something firm. It's considered building. Shmuel says, no. It's not a building. It's a utensil, and therefore it's considered makeh b'patish. Rabbi Yechanan agreed to Shmuel that shaping a rock is considered makeh b'patish. Then we brought that the Mishnah says seemingly misatis v'makeh b'patish. Says Rabbi Yechanan, take the vav out. Misatis, shaping a rock, which is makeh b'patish. And then we had the Mishnah which said that making a hole in the wall, the smallest amount of something, you're chayiv. Now, a hole in the wall is not a chicken coop. So if you're making a hole in the wall, you want to put something in there. So it's not a final touch. It could only be because of boina. So it fits with Rav, not with Shmuel. Because it's not a final thing, but it's building. It's similar to building. So we say for Shmuel, no. Sometimes you make a hole and you fill it in. You put in a hook. You knock in the nail and you're going to hang on that nail. And that's already considered a final touch. And therefore, according to Shmuel, you're chayiv.